Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are excited to be here today and to kind of put together everything we're discussing in sessions 1 and 2 into a product that you can take back to your school or site. For anyone that might be new, I'm Dr. Melora Erickson Tomeno, co-founder and school principal at Portview Preparatory, which is a non-public school for individuals with severe challenging behavior. And we also have the prep group which is our consultation branch where we help students in other settings as well.
I'm Dr. Edward Miguel. Good to see many of you back today. We're excited to get this thing wrapped up so that you feel like you're actually able to take something into your classrooms. And we do hope after all of this that folks do keep in touch and let us know if there are any other ways that we can assist you.
All right, next slide. All right, so who completed their homework from last week? And there's zero pressure because we're going to be going through it together as well and working together as a group. So just answer honestly, because it's no pressure. It'll just guide how long our breakout rooms are.
There should be a poll that's popped up on your Zoom screen. And if the poll has not popped up, you can just put yes or no in our chat or unmute yourself. Voice and choice is always an opportunity here. Okay. Looks like we got an almost even split. Nice work, everyone.
Yeah.
So we have, can you see the results there, Melora?
Yes.
Perfect.
So that helps guide our session. So thank you, everybody, for answering that. So for today, so for today, I'm hoping that we will be able to understand the necessary components to include in an intervention. We'll be developing your guys' interventions together in small groups so that you have an actual product to take back to your sites. We're going to be developing replacement behavior goals. And again, like I stated, walking away with a finished intervention plan that you can test out in your classroom or your site. Okay. Before we jump in, Sarah, did you want to talk about if anyone was using any of the tools or how that was going? Or
yeah, I want to just invite people to really take a moment to reflect and think back. Since our last session, is there anything that you've managed to take away and implement in your classroom? Maybe it hasn't even been directly something you learned in this session, but just any way you have started to practice more inclusive behavior supports in your classroom or site. So a thought that I had on one of the sites I was visiting last week is I've seen one of the teachers we're working with implement these routines for the start of every single classroom. I'm checking in with her students. So that was a really cool thing that I saw last week. But I wanted to invite you at all levels, anything you've either seen other people do or you've tried out yourself related to trying to have more inclusive behavior supports in your classroom. Nice, Angelica. I've used the give and take visual with the students. That's great to see. Anyone else, feel free to unmute yourself or throw it in the chat. With some of those strategies that we're looking at last week, anything you have tried out.
I've helped teachers that I work with. I'm an instructional coach with some understanding the process of taking, finding out triggers and, figuring out what works best with the kids on getting them to do what they need to do.
that's amazing. All right. Anyone else? All right. And I saw that the Padlet just went back in the chat, and you guys are definitely going to want to access the Padlet because on there you'll see a blank intervention plan that you're going to want to pull up, because that's where you'll be able to put all of the information that you're going to be drafting for your intervention plan for your specific student or site. So you'll definitely want to pull that up today.
Just to take you through those steps, the link you're seeing in the chat is taking you to our overall community of practice, which includes a number of different topics. You guys are in the inclusive behavior supports. So you'll find our Padlet in that link. And I can put that directly in the chat as well, just to make it a bit easier. And then we're on session 3, and it's this blank BIP template that Melora is referring to. If you're able to download that onto your computer and print it, that will be really useful, because you can actually put in your behavior plan as we're working through that today. But I'll take you back to our summary.
All right. If you're going to print it and write it in, I suggest adding some spaces because you're going to need more room than that. Okay. So just to summarize everything we reviewed in session 1, really, and 2 as well, is where do we start? So we have a new student, or there's a new behavior demonstrated on campus. What do we do? So we would start by understanding the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequences of the behavior being observed. So that would be step 1 in the process. Step 2 is hypothesizing the function based on your ABC data. And if you guys remember, trends will start emerging based on what is occurring after the behavior. And that's really going to help you identify the function. Step 3 is identifying and implementing antecedent strategies. These are the strategies that you're going to do before a behavior even occurs to reduce the likelihood that you'll even see the behavior. But it is the real world, and you probably will still see the behavior at times. And so that is step 4, identifying consequence strategies. And then step 5, which I think is one of the most important, is teaching alternative behaviors to allow your students to get the same needs met. And one really important thing is to create opportunities for learning these replacement skills so that your students have ample time to be successful and many opportunities to practice them before they might be in a heightened state. All right, so that's just a summary. We had to speed through step 5, which, like I said, is one of the most important steps in session 2. So we really want to go over that again today. And I think this should give you some really good ideas when you're developing your replacement behavior goals for your plans. So for every time we see a target behavior that we're working with, we're going to create goals in 3 areas. And none of those are just behavior reduction goals. So none of them are just going to say, so-and-so will stop aggressing to 0 times per day or whatever. We're really looking at teaching other skills, and then the behavior reduction will naturally occur. So the 3 areas that we teach skills in are functional communication. So getting them to have another communicative behavior that gets the same need met as the behavior. And I'll give you a lot of examples of those. The next thing we have to teach is tolerance, because again, we live in the real world, and every time Johnny doesn't want to raise his hand doesn't mean he doesn't have to. So he's going to have to tolerate doing the thing he doesn't want also. And because he's going to have to tolerate, we also need a regulatory goal. So teaching them how to self-regulate and giving them coping skills and coping strategies are really going to help them with that tolerance piece. They do need to be function-based, and you'll see that in our examples that we really break it down by function. So that piece is really important. And the function, if anyone hasn't been here for other talks, is the why. So why is the student engaging in this behavior? Are they trying to get out of work? Are they trying to get attention? Are they trying to access their Chromebook or tablet? Or are they just doing it because it feels good or they think it's funny? And that would be called automatic. When we're writing these goals, they need to be objective and measurable. So you don't want to have terms in there that are subjective or where someone else would pick up the paper and not have any idea what they're supposed to be teaching. You want a stranger to be able to pick it up and say, okay, this is exactly what I'm doing and how I'm teaching this student the skill. And this is exactly when I know when it will be met. So it's, very much like the IEP goals many of you might be writing. So it's insufficient and unrealistic, like I was saying, to just write behavior reduction goals, because if we're not teaching our students what to do instead, chances are the behavior isn't going to decrease because they have nothing else to do instead to get whatever the need is that they're trying to meet met. And like I said, for every behavior, you need a minimum of 3 replacement goals. And again, those are in the area of functional communication, tolerance training, and coping. So let's take an example for an escape maintained behavior. So this could be a student who every time a task is presented where they have to work independently, they get up and elope from the class, or they start becoming disruptive so that they can avoid doing the work. So an example of a functional communication training goal. So instead of the student just getting up and leaving the class, that could be kind of dangerous, especially depending on location of campus, what type of campus. So instead of them just getting up and running, let's teach them to just ask for a break. So by an example would be by June 6th, 2020, when presented with an aversive task, Johnny will request a break on 80% of opportunities over 5 consecutive school days and across 3 tasks. And if you wanted to be even more specific, you could say we'll verbally request a break, or we'll request a break as evidenced by turning his break card over. However that student communicates, you would want to put that into the goal. And like I was saying, he's not always going to be able to have that break. In the beginning, you're going to want to give it to him so he learns, oh, okay, I don't have to get up and run away every time I don't want to do my work. I can just ask for a break and they'll take it away from me for about 5 minutes. But he's going to eventually need to learn that he has to do his work. So a tolerance goal would be by June 6th, 2020, Johnny will tolerate non-preferred tasks as evidenced by task engagement for a duration of 12 minutes on 80% of opportunities over 5 consecutive school days and across 3 tasks. And this 12 minutes is not an arbitrary number. That's going to be based on the student's baseline. You want to set them up for success. So you don't, if they're only working currently for 2 minutes before they become off task, you're not going to write a goal they're going to attend the entire period. You're really going to want to break that up into smaller, measurable, and achievable segments. And you might need to work on it over the course of the entire school year or even multiple school years until they can get to where they're attending for an entire hour period or sometimes longer. And then finally, because they're going to have to do something that is difficult for them, we're going to need a regulation goal. So an example of this is by June 6, 2020, Johnny will engage with 3 novel sensory fidgets while completing non-preferred tasks on 80% of opportunities over 5 consecutive school days and across 3 tasks. So when he is expected to be working those 12 minutes, he can have a little fidget in his hand that might help him cope with having to do the work, or the TheraBand on his chair that he can kick while he is expected to work. Maybe it's alternative seating, a bouncy chair. Any of those things are really good strategies to help them stay attending when they want to avoid doing the work. Okay, so now we're going to see another example. It's the same 3 areas. So functional communication training, tolerance training, and regulation, but it's for a different function. So this student isn't trying to get out of doing work. They just want their teacher or maybe their student's attention. And so they might be acting out or calling out of turn or making inappropriate or funny jokes when it's not an appropriate time to do so. So for that type of behavior, we could do something like by June 6th, 2020, when attention is withheld, Johnny will say, "Excuse me," paired with the individual's name on 80% of opportunities over 5 consecutive school days and across 3 individuals in 3 settings. Another example of this is just teaching the student to raise their hand and say, "Hey, Miss Smith, can I have your attention for a minute?" But teaching them a pro-social skill and a more appropriate skill to get the attention of the individual that they're seeking. So that's the functional communication piece. Again, they're going to have to tolerate attention being withheld. So another goal would be for the tolerance training is that Johnny will tolerate attention being withheld and work independently for 30 minutes on 80% of opportunities over 5 consecutive school days and across settings. So as we're going through these goals, you guys, I want you to kind of pinpoint any, if you're like, okay, yeah, that's the student that I'm thinking of right now. I need that goal. And you can even start jotting down some notes that you might have based on these examples. And the last piece is the regulation piece. So Johnny will complete all steps of the behavior relaxation curriculum, which is a deep breathing curriculum, and engage in taking deep breaths upon level 1 escalation on 80% of opportunities. So when attention is being withheld for these 30 minutes, that might be really hard for Johnny. So you could teach him a strategy such as taking deep breaths in order to tolerate not having that attention delivered during that 30 minutes where he is supposed to be working independently. Okay, so another function, oh, does someone have their hand raised?
I do. I have
Okay,
a question about this. N- Does this work with children who, I don't know how to say this. We have a child that's with us now that is very, this is his MO. He always tantrums, calls the teachers a bitch. He doesn't want to do anything, but his background is a very abusive one. He came from big time trauma. Is this appropriate, these type of goals for that?
yes, so these types of goals have been empirically validated across multiple populations over several decades. It does work with that type of student as well. There's more and more research coming out on trauma-informed ABA. There's some work by Greg Hanley in this area. And then, why am I spacing on her name? She's an old colleague of mine. I will remember it before we're done. When Eddie presents his section, I'll look it up. She does a lot on trauma-informed ABA. And I can point you to her, even Heidi Eilers. Sorry, it just came to me. So it's Heidi and then EILERS. She was a victim of actually abuse and trauma and is a BCBA. And so she has a very unique perspective and is very open about her experiences and how to apply these same things to her. I think one important thing to note is that before introducing these types of things and these types of demands, I think the functional communication piece would be, you can implement right away. But before doing that tolerance piece, I would really work to build rapport and that trust with the student before doing some of the more difficult goals.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. And keep raising your hand and maybe you'll win the 30-minute consult so we can talk longer. Okay, so another function is access. So if a student, is calling the teacher a name because he wants to be sent to the principal because he has a really good relationship with the principal, say. So he wants access to that person. Or another student perhaps is just getting out of his seat and going and getting his Chromebook instead of asking appropriately or getting it at an appropriate time. So they're doing the challenging behavior because they want something. What do we do then? So for the functional communication piece, an example would be by using a 3 to 5 word phrase to request the preferred item. So just saying what you want. Hey, I want my Chromebook. Again, they're not always going to be able to have their Chromebook, but once again, in the beginning, I would reinforce that pretty continuously. So every time they said, I want my Chromebook, I would let them have it in the beginning. And then you quickly fade that. You just want them to learn the power of their functional communication, and you want their challenging behavior to lose power. Because the reality is, oftentimes, the challenging behavior can get them what they want. And there's sometimes that we as educators can't do much about it. So like the kid that just walks out of the class. So we want to at least give them a more appropriate way to access that type of behavior.
To sort of develop on from what Teresa was asking, I know Ricky Robinson and many different advocates are talking about the student behavior as a form of communication, right? So often some of those behaviors aren't the way we would like them to communicate their needs. And from students that have been raised in a household with abuse, they haven't had those modeling of how to appropriately communicate. So through this functional communication training, by having a goal in this area, you are directly helping to support that area of need where that student's lacking and hasn't yet had the training. So we can teach them how to ask these things in a more appropriate way. So yeah, I see it really nicely all tying together.
Yeah, 100%. You nailed it. And even really with students, I'm finding more and more, especially after the pandemic, more and more students are A, having mental health issues, and B, do lack that functional and effective communication. So having these types of goals is just so important for all of our students. I think it's just to be more cautious of those that might come from an abusive or maybe setting where they didn't have a lot of resources, or, you know, if they were in poverty or things like that, I always try to tweak and be a little more cautious, especially like with the measurement criteria, giving them more time to meet certain goals. But yes, that functional communication is so imperative for so many different developmental issues. But so for an access maintained behavior, so for a kiddo that's engaging in problem behavior to get what they want, a tolerance training goal could be something like Johnny will tolerate delayed access to preferred items as evidenced by continuation of current task or selection of an alternative item. That piece is really important. It's a lot easier for a student to say, to accept, no, you can't have your Chromebook, but you can have the class iPad, or I'll project the lesson on the screen for you. Which do you prefer? That's a lot easier to tolerate than just flat out no. And then you can avoid the power struggles oftentimes that way too, by giving them choices. And then finally, for a regulation activity or goal, Johnny will engage in 3 novel relaxation or leisure activities and engage in those activities when denied access to the preferred item or activity. This is another thing that we find so often is students, again, they don't have a lot of leisure and coping or relaxation skills that they can use in a school setting. So many of us are coping and relaxation now as our phones, right? And going to our phones, and in classrooms where phones aren't allowed, what can the student do? So we need to teach them alternative things like reading a preferred book, or sitting in the, you know, sensory corner of the classroom and taking deep breaths, doing a puzzle, lots of other things that they can do, but it's not first nature, I think, like it used to be, now that we have so much technology at the tips of our fingers. So some of these skills that seem so easy, a lot of our students are lacking. And so you have to teach those things. All right, next slide. Finally, for automatically maintained behavior, this one is a little bit different. So this is the behavior that they just do because they enjoy doing it. So it's the kid on the playground that hits another kid on the head and just runs away, but thinks it's funny. He doesn't care if anyone else saw it, or he got out of something for it. He just thinks it's funny for doing it. Another example is like kiddos that flap. If they're higher functioning, if you ask, like, why do you do that? They'll say it feels good. So those types of behavior. The only 2 things that research have shown that helps with those types, if it's like verbal types of behavior, you can teach them functional communication. But for other types of behavior, the only thing that has proven to be effective in replacing it is play skills. So increasing play skills. So for the functional communication goal, it could be something like Johnny will demonstrate 2 non-scripted phrases during a 5-minute probe on 80% of opportunities. And for a play skill, it could be something like Johnny will demonstrate functional play with 5 new play items on 80% of opportunities. All right. Okay, so now is where we're going to put all of this together. So everything from session 2, all the way from defining the behavior, onset, offset, what the function is, all the way to teaching those skills. We're going to start putting that together now. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Miguel. Dr. Miguel, sorry.
I got demoted for a second. All right, so just to recap our homework, we wanted to identify the most challenging behavior that was impacting your setting, whether that's overall classroom behavior, whether that's specific structure. Some of you also mentioned that you became inclusive campuses essentially overnight and didn't have the necessary supports. The importance of this training is related to how these strategies can affect you positively. So really, it depends on your situation. We want to define what that behavior looks like. Again, it may be an individual, maybe 2 students, or it may be a whole class. Either way, it works. You want to define that in layman's terms that makes sense to anyone reading them. And then we want to move on to what the ABCs are: antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. From that, we're selecting the 3 antecedent strategies to address the target behavior that we've identified. And then we're also selecting 2 consequence strategies to address the behavior. And then based on the baselines of or the student's abilities, we're going to be writing 2 replacement behavior goals. And hopefully with all that put together, we see some results. Next slide. All right, so what's the purpose of the behavior intervention plan? And I mean, this is, what is the purpose is sort of a big part of Melora and I's journey, because we came across time and time again behavior plans that were written and they were not related to the student, or they were not implemented, or they didn't make sense. And so part of our journey and part of our effect on the field, if you will, is to impress upon folks to write purposeful behavior plans that make sense, not only for the student, but that makes sense for the folks that are in this field to make a difference. So writing a plan that helps people make that difference that they want to make. So who's the plan for? It's individualized. It's for each student, class, or site, and created based on whatever function we are seeing. What is it? It's a consented plan structured for behavioral success for our students. And why? The plan is structured for success for the student. Without the plan, consistency and structure for challenging behavior wouldn't happen. So the biggest reason and the biggest advantage of a plan, in my experience, is to not deviate from it when things start to go awry, because they will, and there could be other factors. And so always referencing back to the plan. We used to have this saying here at Portview, because, there was a few times where folks were trying to make changes, and we would say, the behavior plan is Bible. You can't change it. And that's the truth, right? We need to be consistent with that, because everything that has to do with anything related to that student, site, or class's behavior is centered around that behavior plan. And if you change it, you're affecting everything.
The only time you would change it is if you go for a extended period of time and you're noticing that the behavior plan isn't effective. But this is like, I'm talking after months of implementing it, because students aren't going to pick up on those contingencies right away. But if you're recognizing that it's not an effective plan, you might need to revisit the function and redevelop.
Next slide. All right, so this is kind of a blurb from one of our behavior intervention plans. And one of the things that, again, we cite is no deviations or modifications to the plan are to be made without parent, BCBA, and our district acknowledgement. And then there's some specific guidelines there underneath there. You will have a version of this on the Padlet, so I'm not going to spend too much time here.
And also, this is how we do it. I had talked to Sarah before. All of our behavior plans are overseen by board certified behavior analysts, but I know at different sites, sometimes it's the school psych that observes it. Sometimes it's the principal or the teacher themselves. So just specifying who's kind of responsible for the monitoring of it is really important.
Okay, so we've got our behavioral definitions here, and a couple of things are already circled. And the first thing is these behaviors that are listed are specifically behaviors maintained by Escape. You might have different behaviors in your plan that you put together, or that you ultimately put together, that operate under different functions. Each function requires a different intervention. So when we write a behavior plan, which is how we address the behavior that is exhibited as a result of a function, we're going to specify which function we're referring to. So this function is Escape. And then we have the behavioral topographies. So behavioral topographies exist so that anybody walking into the room that has seen the document knows exactly what they're seeing and knows exactly ultimately when to turn on the data counter and then turn it back off again. Okay. And so just a quick example for elopement, defined as student A getting up from desk and wandering away or leaving instructional area or classroom support provider or paraprofessional. That's what we call paraprofessionals. A distance of 3 feet or more without gaining permission to do so. Unsuccessful attempts to engage in elopement are counted as an occurrence of behavior. Just to highlight really quickly, for elopement, we vary those distances. For younger students, it's typically a shorter distance. For older students, it's a longer distance. And it also depends on the freedom to move in the classroom, how the teacher structures their day, what the students are allowed to do. So all those things are taken into account with respect to that sort of elopement line, if you will. Another example is physical aggression, defined as student A kicking others using 1 foot at a time. He will kick others in any area he can gain access to. He may also bite and or scratch, but these portions of the topography are rare. Unsuccessful attempts to engage in physical aggression are counted as an occurrence of behavior. And then usually outbursts is something that is a combination of behaviors that the student exhibits. So in this case, it is elopement in combination with physical aggression and noncompliance, and sometimes in combination with screaming, yelling, spitting, and or throwing objects. One of the reasons that we typically utilize outbursts is because imagine taking data on all of those things separately: physical aggression, noncompliance, screaming, yelling, spitting, and or throwing objects, all while they're occurring at the same time. It's impossible. So when we notice that behaviors are exhibited in combination, we typically put that behind a outburst label, and that is its own sort of classification. Next slide. All right, so the next part, I mentioned this before, is we work with these topographies so that people know what to look for, and then we go to the onset and offset. And the onset and offset is the beginning of the behavior and the end of the behavior. Okay, so for those definitions, we have assigned an onset and an offset. For elopement, onset occurs when the topography is first present. Offset occurs when the topography has been absent and the student is in the area of instruction for 30 seconds. For physical aggression, the onset occurs when the topography is first present. The offset occurs when the topography has been absent for 10 seconds. And then outburst onset occurs when the topography is first present. Offset occurs when the topography has been absent for 60 seconds.
Onset and offset are really important for taking data. So whoever's taking data knows exactly what one occurrence looks like. We had an IEP just recently where the student engaged in self-injurious behavior and his baseline was like 4,000 times a day. And while this kid did have very high levels, the school before was counting each that, even if it was that quick, as one, whereas we would have an offset. So this would be like only one occurrence instead of 3, because it all happened. It was all the same episode, if you will, and that just makes data collection easier. So this is really defining when you're identifying that the behavior has started and stopped, and that's going to help any para educators in your class or the teacher know when to take the data and what counts as one occurrence. So for any reporting that you might have to do with a teacher or a site administrator, you're able to know exactly how many times it occurred. All right, so now we're going to get into our groups. And for those of you that already potentially outlined all of this, awesome. You could be group leaders, breakout session. Also pull from that, because those aren't the same examples that we just went over here. So you should have a lot of examples to pull from when coming up with the topography for your behavior that you are most concerned about in your classroom or at your site. And then also how to write that onset and offset. So for this first section, we're just going to take about 5 minutes. So I think Sarah will put you in breakout rooms.
So hold on a sec while I create the breakout rooms. And just to recap, in those groups, you'll be talking about finding the target behavior that you want to focus your plan on.
And then defining it. Yeah, we want you to define it and then also do the onset and offset for it.
Okay. And they can put this straight into the plan, right?
Yep. And
So
in like
you
I'm sorry, Sarah.
Sorry, you should be able to access this from the Padlet. It's the blank BIP templates. And I'll put that link also straight in the chat. Let me know if anyone has any issues accessing that. It is a Word file. You're welcome to also just write down your comments or type them up in whatever way suits you. But I will open up the breakout rooms and you'll have 5 minutes to try and talk through with other people and gather your own ideas. Any questions before we open up the breakout rooms? Okay, breakout rooms should be opening.
All right, I think we have everyone, oh, just about everyone. All right, does anyone want to share out a topographical definition of the behavior that, or the behavior you chose and then how you chose to define it and the onset and offset? Anyone? Don't all raise your hands at once. Celeste or Sarah, in any of your groups, did anyone have good definitions that you thought?
Lloyd, I can see you've unmuted yourself. Can you share about what you were focusing on?
The behavior, the target behavior is throwing of things, or the toys like that. And the offset is that I ask the boy to, I give the boy a ball and throw it on the basket. Shoot it in the basket.
So that's the replacement, right?
Yes.
Well, yeah, so the offset you'll want, I would say, like the absence of throwing items that he shouldn't for, I would say, like 5 seconds for a behavior like that. Then you would know that behavior's over. And then the replacement, that's great, would be like throwing a ball in a basket, throwing a ball in a hoop. But yeah, great. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. You're welcome.
In our group, Teresa shared a really good information regarding one of her students and targeting the behavior.
Want to take the mic, Teresa? Oh, awesome.
I guess. I didn't really want to, but I'll do it. I was just telling them about a child who he disrupts class, but we're thinking that there's a possible intellectual delay by a couple years. He's almost 5, but is like a 2-year-old. Not only 5 words, but the 2 things that we noticed that we identified was transitions. When transitions happen, he runs away. And so one of his favorite things to do is Play-Doh. So we tell him, if you keep running away, no Play-Doh. And the other one is learning centers. When he's in learning centers, he hits others a lot to try to get toys or his way. So we do redirection with that. And usually he loves being in the block center. And if we take him out, he really gets upset and tantrums because he's getting taken out. But we keep reminding him, first you have to do this, and then you could do this. So the consequences that we do are the no Play-Doh and then no centers that he likes. We use the antecedent strategies to address the behavior, was using a visual timer with a 5-minute warning for transitions, and in centers or whenever we end something. We tell him with a visual of the expectation before we start a new activity, so that he knows that he has to stay here. This is what he does, and we wait. And then we use visual cues first and then. Then we replace behavior goals with, by the last day of school, he'll follow prompts 80% of the time during transitions. And then he will play in learning centers with few negative interactions 80% of the time by the end of the year too.
Awesome. Thank you. That was great sharing, and another great real life example for the group of some of these other areas that we're going to talk about. So thank you, Teresa, for sharing, even though you didn't want to. All right. I think we could go to the next slide. Okay, so the next portion of your intervention plan. So now you have a definition of what the behavior looks like. You have what does it look like when the behavior starts, and how do you know when the behavior is ended? Now you want to look at some of those things like Teresa was talking about, the setting events. So what is happening in the environment that might be eliciting the behavior? So like, for example, the student who is throwing objects that he shouldn't be throwing, is he bored? Are there objects being left out that he's getting access to? So looking at all of those environmental aspects that might be causing the behavior to happen. So these are like some of the triggers, like what's prompting the behavior to happen that you don't want to happen. So things like this could be non-preferred tasks are present. So they're bored and they're going to do something else. Maybe it's a difficult task that's in place and they don't know what to do. So they're going to do something else that's more fun. A directive given. Did someone have a question?
Yeah, if the boy is disturbed of what he's doing, he will throw the toys. Or a friend will get one of his toys that is he's playing with. Yeah.
Okay. So you'll put those things, like if his friend takes the toy that he was playing with, that's a setting event for his larger behavior then. So that's
Okay.
the example. Yeah. So that would be like an aversive stimulus present, but yeah, you'll want to define it exactly like you just said. So is that kind of clear what those environmental events are that you want to be looking for? Sometimes, I know this sounds crazy, sometimes it's the tone of the light, or if you have a light bulb that's going out that's flickering, that could even just cause a behavior in a kiddo that just can't tolerate that. So really paying attention to the entire environment to understand what's going on that might be triggering that behavior from occurring. All right, next slide. Okay, so in our next breakout, you're going to do setting events, but I also want you guys to start thinking about why are they engaging in the behavior? And you may not have ABC data for this student or for this behavior, but you've seen it enough times, you probably have a really good feel for why the student is engaging in the behavior. So remember, the 4 functions are escape, access to tangibles or preferred items, attention, or automatically reinforced. So you want to pick one of those 4 why you think your student's doing it. And then that's going to lead to your functionally equivalent replacement behaviors. And that's everything that I went over in the first like 20 minutes of our presentation today, all of those goals. And again, there will be more examples on the sample BIP in the Padlet. So I want you guys to figure out what are the triggers for the behavior. So what are the setting events, and identify those and list them out. Why you think the child is engaging in the behavior, so the function. And then I want you to do the 3 replacement behaviors. So 1 for functional communication, 1 for tolerance, and 1 for regulation. All right, and we'll have a little bit more time and we'll go around to the groups to help guide the conversation also. But if you want to do the next slide, I'm pretty sure we're back to a breakout, Sarah. Oh no, sorry. I wanted to give you guys more practice with function, identifying the function, because like I said, you may not have your ABC data, or you might not have been able to collect it yet. So I wanted to just give some anecdotal examples. And this is just how we graph it. But I'm going to focus more on the narrative here. So we have Martin. These are fake names. He has an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. He's 15 years and 7 months. The target behavior that we're trying to reduce is self-injurious behavior. And here's the teacher report. So let's try and guess the function. So I don't know what to do anymore. Every time I ask Martin to do anything, he punches himself in the face to the point of redness and bruising. So why is he punching himself in the face?
Are we trying to guess here? I would say he's
Yeah.
trying to avoid a task.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, he is trying to get out of doing what he doesn't want to do. So every time I ask him to do anything, he punches himself in the face. Good job. All right, next example. Okay, now we have Sally. She also has autism spectrum disorder. She's 11 years, 4 months, and her target behavior is also self-injury. And the teacher reports, Sally is so loving and affectionate. However, every time I have to attend to other students or work at my desk, she starts to bang her head. And this part,
Jealousy.
what was it?
Jealousy.
Yes. So what is she trying to get? She's jealous.
Attention.
Gaining attention.
Attention seeker. Yeah.
Good job, you guys. Awesome. Next example. Okay. So now we have John. He's 20 years, 3 months, and his target behavior is outburst. So that what Eddie was talking, Dr. Miguel was talking about when multiple behaviors are occurring at the same time. And the teacher reports, John loves food so much. As soon as there's food in his view, he attempts to grab it and eat it. When he is told no, He has major outbursts, including hitting, kicking, and screaming. It is disruptive to my entire class.
Denied access.
Absolutely, yep. So his behavior is maintained by access, and when he is denied access, he'll have his outburst behavior. Good job. All right. And our last one, I believe. Okay, so we have Samuel, who's 5 years and 7 months. The target behavior that we're trying to reduce is hand flapping. And I don't typically try and, this wouldn't be, if the student had like severe self-injurious behavior or physical aggression, I would target that way before hand flapping. But let's say for Samuel, his hand flapping is so extensive that he can't hold a pencil or a crayon or get any work done. So the teacher says, I don't know what to do anymore. I can't get Samuel to do any work because he won't stop flapping his hand. He does it all the time and nothing seems to help. So what's our function here? It's the hardest function. So this one is automatic. So he does it all the time. Nothing helps. It doesn't help if he has attention. If he's not doing work, nothing's helping. So he's just doing it because doing the behavior is what is reinforcing it. If this is probably an example of he just feels good and he's getting input that he needs. So those are all examples. So kind of think of your narrative, like what would your teacher report be? And you should be able to extrapolate what the function is based on that. And Sarah, how are we on time? I'm wondering because I have to do setting events, hypothesize the function, and come up with 3 goals. Can we give them a little more than 5 minutes? Is that okay?
Sounds good. I'll put 7 minutes on the clock.
Perfect. All right.
And I'll, yeah, just to repeat, that's hypothesizing the setting, deciding what the most probable function is, and then identifying the 3 replacements. Okay. I will open up those breakout rooms.
All right. Did anyone have anything to share from what they were hypothesizing the function was? I know I was with Angelica and her hypothesized function was attention, but there was also some motivation issues. I don't know if anyone else had any other functions that they identified and what they were going to kind of try and put in place to teach instead. Anyone? You guys are a bashful group today. Oh, Kenneth?
So I have a kid who flaps a lot, and he has issues of name calling. He is very quick to, to when another kid does something that he doesn't like, or he feels that the other kid has gone ahead of him, he will call names, and sometimes shove, and he does it almost sometimes spontaneously. So I think the function is mainly automatic, but I've really also been unable to, I struggle to control it because sometimes it happens so fast. You talk about it, but it recurs again very, very fast before you realize. And so the kid will flap a lot as attention issues, and will walk pace a lot in the class. Mhm.
So thank you for sharing. For the flapping, I would teach some play. How old is he? Sorry.
He's 11 years.
Okay. So maybe not play skills, but I would teach some leader skills. And I don't know if you were in session 2, we talked about differential reinforcement. So if you can have him doing something with his hands that he likes, like putty or Play-Doh, that's incompatible with flapping, that might help for the automatic type behavior. And then the name calling it almost sounds like there's some impulse control. So those relation goals that we talked about are really important for you to develop.
Mhm.
For sharing.
Okay.
Okay. I know that good conversations are happening because we're all popping into the breakout rooms and we hear all the great content. So I'm happy to hear that. All right, next slide.
And Melora, I may have messed the slide order up now, so correct me if this is wrong.
Go back because I think we talked about this is where we are. Yeah. All right.
Okay, so Melora talked about the setting events under which the target behaviors occur. So one of the things that we had to do is we had to really modify setting events so that engagement and replacement behaviors, or at least to just encourage the target behavior from occurring. And so some of examples of modified setting events would be setting clear and firm contingencies. So perhaps, it's more than just what's on the schedule and more than just the general classroom rules. We're setting expectations as well as first then schedules for each activity the student participates in. The next one is breaks from demands contingent on task completion. And, this is one of the simplest ways to reinforce behavior, especially when we're talking about introducing new tasks or non-preferred tasks. Just get this done and you can have a break. And then we modify the task so that the student can access that break. And then break obviously can be either engagement in a preferred activity or even practicing coping strategies. We want to differentially reinforce staying on task and following demands. So, initially, even if the student doesn't necessarily complete the assignment or the task that is being placed in front of them, if they're at their desk and they're not eloping or they're not screaming, we're still reinforcing. Visual schedule in place throughout the day. We've heard a lot about visual schedules today. People are using them, which is fantastic. Token economy in place throughout the day, and we're making sure that we paired those tokens with primary reinforcers. So we've conditioned those tokens. Simply putting in place a token economy from, with no background, kind of sets the token economy up for failure. So really making sure those tokens are worth something to the child. And then a visual timer for student to reference, especially during times where cognition is low or where with students that are typically going to refuse the second you ask them to do something. Having that timer, it is a very simple way for them to feel some semblance of control over the situation because they know that there's a clear start and finish.
And just to reiterate, I know that it's often done well at the elementary school levels, the use of timers, but even with high school students, that continues to be exceptionally useful for them to have that visual aid. I found myself as a teacher, when I become heightened, my concept of time disappears. So how long the child has actually been, performing well, if I've got a visual timer next to them, it also helps me. So yeah, can't emphasize that enough, what a useful tool that could be.
The big thing to remember is we're here at this stage because we know certain behaviors can be triggered. What we're trying to do is trigger the right ones. And so it effectively then trigger doesn't need to be necessarily a bad thing, right? And so that's where it starts to get fun. How can I trigger the right things to happen? Next slide. All right, so this is a big discussion in the sense that we are shifting our mindset. We're triggering different behaviors now. What elements of the classroom environment, what elements of the campus, what creative ideas can you propose that's going to make it fun for you as well to engage this student in these alternative behaviors? Go for it.
Even if you guys start thinking about visuals that you need to develop when you get back to your class, all of that would be changing the environment.
Nice.
All right.
Okay, I'll be opening up the breakout rooms now. And we have 5 minutes in these groups. Okay.
All right, welcome back. So anybody inspired to share about triggering good behavior? Anybody at all?
Changing the environment up.
I got a fun one to share. This was just right at the end of my last teaching sort of placement. And I found that the students were always coming into the math classroom being like, oh, I hate math, I hate math. And it just started this triggering of atmosphere that wasn't really helpful for anyone. And I recognized that really they just wanted to say something to me and they didn't have the conversational skills to think of something more sort of positive to say. So I started using, based on the token economy system that was already based into the classroom, if students could say one positive thing when they walked into the classroom about math, I would give them a point. And it could literally be, I love math. Didn't have to be anything more meaningful than that. And I would find kids in the corridor passing me saying, I love math, Miss James, I love math. And it just slowly starts to change an environment when you have people saying comments like that rather than I hate this. So yeah.
I
Small-
love that. That's such a good modified, event that made such a big impact. Does anyone else have any others that you thought maybe that you would be changing in your classroom? I know in our group with Lynn, we were talking about an eloper and we talked, moving the chair away from the door, like to the furthest point in the classroom away from the door, which would, makes the response effort to get out the door higher. And it also gives like when the parents in the class or the teacher time to kind of intercept and redirect.
Well, what I wanted to share is like sometimes I've tried some days to look at my self-talk and rather than tell students what they should not do, sometimes I try on a day just to tell them what they should do, because I've seen like sometimes when students are told don't do this, they end up doing it a lot. So now I sometimes try to focus the energy on just having the positive talk of do this, do the other. I avoid saying don't do, because the don't sometimes appears to be a bit attractive, because what we are telling them not to do is what attracts them. It has some, it pulls them. It has some kind of motivation that makes them do it. And I see like it works, not all the time, but sometimes it works.
I love that. We talked about that, I think in session 1 about a mindset shift, like
Okay.
why we don't write behavior reduction goals, we write what we want them to do instead. As goals.
So
I love that. I love that.
I missed the first sessions. Actually,
you-
today is the first one that
You're already
attended.
doing it. You're ahead of the game.
Thank you.
I love it. All right. Thanks for sharing.
Mm.
I'd love to share one more. And this was again about just trying to change the atmosphere in a classroom. I know as an educational specialist, I was always going around collecting data on students. And I think they felt very watched by me. And the goals were usually in areas where they felt they were deficit in. So it's always focusing on the negative. But I would try and get them to catch me having good conversations about either them or even other students with other teachers. So say there's another teacher in the room, I try and say positive things about students. So when the other kids come in, they like catch me saying nice things and realize like, these are the things we want to talk about. This is what teachers are proud of. I'm like, oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. I was just talking about how cool this essay was this student wrote the other day. And just changing this atmosphere around what my role was as an educator and what information I was really focused on.
Very cool. All right. Should we move on to the next part of our plan? We're gonna. There we go. All right.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a schedule of reinforcement. And the schedule is basically to make consistent across individuals that serve the students, whether they're paraprofessionals or subs or teachers themselves, how the student is going to be reinforced, when, with what, etc. I mean, we've all had situations where we try to put in place some structured approaches only to have somebody else come in and sort of offer the world the next day. And then we come back and we try to go back to what we were doing. And it's all like we're starting from square one. So scheduled reinforcement is super important so that everyone's on the same page. An example of a schedule of reinforcement relating to social praise. Social praise will always be paired and continuously delivered contingent upon replacement behaviors. Begin reinforcing replacement behaviors using a continuous schedule. So basically, anytime the student exhibits a replacement behavior paired with social praise, once the replacement behaviors are in this student's behavior repertoire, we will thin a paired reinforcer to a variable schedule. So when we say continuous, it's on a fixed rate of 1 or every time it occurs. When we say variable, we're talking about every 3 occurrences of the behavior. So sometimes it might be 2, sometimes it might be 4, sometimes it might be 1. We want to make it variable because once you get to that point, there is a high likelihood that the student will maintain these behaviors in their repertoire. This is something we want to put in place thoughtfully based on what the ability of the classroom is. One thing that Laura and I have been privy to is programs that are sort of prescribed by a lot of times by outside agencies for classroom settings. And these reinforcement procedures are just not feasible. They didn't take into account the people working in the classroom or the number of duties that the teacher had or the lesson plan and all those things that, you know, are really, really important. So the schedule of reinforcement really should be contingent on how the classroom is structured and when the classroom reinforcement procedures are. Obviously, if we're talking about a behavior intervention plan, this student needs to some degree more than what the classroom offers in terms of reinforcement, but we don't want to discount the embedded reinforcement and behavioral procedures that are in that classroom. So when you're discussing this, definitely highlight all the things that you're already doing and talk about how you can enhance them for purposes of proposing that schedule that you want to come up with. Any questions? Okay. I'll take this.
Sure. All right. So once you have all your replacement behaviors that you're teaching, you know, when you're going to reinforce all of those, the behaviors still might occur. So we're going to need to put all of those antecedent strategies and consequence strategies that we talked about very heavily in session 2 in place. So things like functional communication training, teaching them how to use their language to get their needs met, provide choice-making opportunities. All of the visual supports would be under antecedent strategies, the first then contingencies. All of those, if you need to reference slides on the Padlet, you should be able to find the slides from session 2. And we went into all of the antecedent strategies in detail. So something like a token economy would fall under here. So what you guys are going to do when you go into your next breakout is list all of the antecedent strategies that you want to put in place, and then a description to make it specific for that student. So if over here you have something like visual cues, you're going to want to say, so Angelica, I'll use I think it was your example of like the color coded schedule on his desk of like when breaks were available and what he was to expect during the day. And then he had a privacy board. So that description would all go here. And then next slide, in addition to the antecedent strategies, I want you guys to start thinking about the consequence strategies. Okay, so what are you going to do when the behavior does happen? And this can be the replacement behavior that you want to see. You're going to give positive reinforcement to, but then you're also going to put on extinction. Again, sorry to use you again, Angelica. I just was in your guys' breakout room most. She said, you know, when the privacy board would fail and the student would pick it up and throw it across the classroom and he would start engaging in off-task behavior, she would ignore the behavior because he was trying to get that attention and she would continue teaching her class. So that's a perfect example of an extinction strategy that was used. In this section also, like if it's physical aggression or like that eloping, anything like blocking or redirecting the student. And again, you can find all of those strategies on the session 2 slides. And if you were here, then you probably remember them too. So in our next breakout, I want you guys to be thinking about how you want to reinforce the behaviors that you want to see. And then what antecedent strategies you need to put in place to avoid the behavior from occurring. And then what consequence procedures you need to put in place when the behavior does occur to try to reduce it.
And for those of you, if you want to pull up that session to slideshow on our community of practice Padlets, you can pull up the session 2 slides and it will have the antecedent strategies listed somewhere far down. Why can't I find them? Was it session 1?
Is it possible you put the link into the chat?
Yes, I will do. Here we go. That
Here's like-
slide has all the antecedent strategies. I'll put the link in the chat right now. I think, there we go. There is even a list for you guys there. So we'll open up the breakout rooms. We're talking about what are the things we're doing to prime the classroom to be proactive, what proactive procedures are we putting in, and then our antecedents, and then what are our consequence interventions as well. We will have 5 minutes for this breakout room just to try to keep us on track. And they should be open in a moment. We've still got a minute. I'm just being me. I had to buy myself a Fitbit when I was working with that student I talked to you quite a bit about, with the just so that I could, whenever it was like 5 minutes, I had to start 5 minutes, because otherwise I could not keep track of what was happening with the
It can get crazy.
right.
Yeah.
But I'm the type of person, if I boil an egg, I need to set a timer, because I'll get distracted before the egg's boiled and move on to something else. And
Me too.
I'm amazed how many eggs I can burn.
Yeah.
Ditto.
Like stop frequently and be like, okay, where was I going? What was I doing?
Yep. Okay. Welcome back.
Yeah.
I think we got everyone here.
Awesome. All right. Well, does anyone want to share out just anything about any of the strategies that they thought might help some of the target behaviors that they were addressing in their plan, and or anything just about like having the plan now, and any questions about implementing it when you go back to your site?
Okay, for me, if the boy is disturbed, he will throw things. Okay, he will throw the toys, and somebody will be hit like that. So before playing, I will tell him that, okay, if your friend is playing, if you want to a toy that he is playing with, you ask permission. Ask, can I have a turn? And the boy who is playing also, you have to share the toys with your friends, so there will be no trouble. So sometimes it works. Yeah.
Awesome.
But
I love
yeah.
with that age, I will be cautious in saying that the research doesn't always support the efficacy of social stories, but sometimes with our younger students, a little social story about sharing with even pictures of them in it, or like a super friend book, like I'm a super friend, and if I don't have my toy, I know I can ask for a turn. I can say things like, may I have a turn? Or, and then when my friend is taking a turn, I can sit nicely and play with something else. And putting it in a little story really helps with that age. And they think it's cool, like if their picture is in the book, they're like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
of course, thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Okay, well, we have a reflection activity, I believe, next. And we'll have our contacts. Oh, well, let me do this first. Yes. So important things to remember. So again, you really want to make sure, because these are individualized and really context specific to your classroom or your site, you want to make sure you really know the student you're working with or your site, even simple things like your site rules, like what we talked about early on. Here at Portview, the BCBA monitors the behavior plans, but at your site, that might be somebody else. So really being familiar with the context under which the plan is going to be implemented. Like Dr. Miguel was saying, that consistent implementation, don't change it before you know if it's working or not. You got to give it time. Habits take a long time to form, and they take even longer to break. So you got to give it that time. Sarah, did you have something?
I was going to ask a question about that really. When you have a new student into a site, so they've come with a BIP that was written elsewhere, you usually have 30 days before you have your IEP review meeting. If in that time it seems like it was a very, very different environment they were coming from, would you still say stick to that? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We always, within that first 30 days, we usually, because it's such a unique setting, and I think all educational facilities are pretty unique with unique rules.
Right.
That first 30 days is really a perfect time to assess and decide what you want the plan to be. And then after that, I would give it time before you change it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If something goes wrong, ensure that the BIP was being followed. Oftentimes, if there's breakdown or we see like a really big spike in behavior, I swear like 90% of the time we go back and the behavior plan wasn't followed as written. So make sure it's being followed. And when you're debriefing with staff, like review, like, okay, well, did you do this? Did you do this? And oftentimes you'll see it wasn't implemented. Train on the behavior plan anyone in your class that might be encountering your student, even like an SLP that's on campus, share it with him or her so that they know the strategies that might be working for you in your class, and then it's consistent across environments. And then just continuously assessing, okay, is the behavior going down? Is this an accurate plan? Are we in a good place? So those are some of the important things to remember.
So as we wrap up, I'd really love just to take a moment for us to reflect and share our thoughts. I'll offer you the choice, or you can try and address all three prompts. But is there anything that you've learned from either one or all three of these sessions? Anything you've noticed or anything you're still left wondering? So I invite you in the chat to share, it could be one from each category or just one from a category of choice. But is there anything you feel you've learned from these sessions so far? Anything you've noticed or anything you are wondering? And I'm going to leave you some think time just to type those into the chat. And then we'll move on to our next piece. And if you prefer just to unmute yourself rather than write in the chat, that also works just fine. But I'm going to give you some time just to type away. Thank you for those who've taken a moment to share so far. It's great to hear from people. I think just understanding the process and getting some validation about the steps you're taking, and sometimes just realizing you are doing the right things already. Getting some more ideas on strategies on how to help behaviors. And then I'm hearing from Angelica about how to implement visual aids, and then noticing changing in her own teaching process through this positive environment. We are going to have a question and answer right at the end available for anyone that would like to stick on and ask Dr. Melora or Dr. Edward any questions. I do want to invite you first, though, to share your feedback. So this is the first time we've really run this community of practice series through SIP. We always want to improve our practice. We have used surveys at the end of each session so far. But for this session, what we'd like to try and do is use a Jamboard activity. So if you see the link in the chat, it will take you to the Jamboard, which I think you guys can see on my screen. And what we'd like you to do is take a moment to read the question on the top of each slide. And there are 5 slides. So if you flick through on this next frame button, you can get to each question. And just take a moment. On the left-hand side, you'll see a sticky note, and just add any comments about how you think things have gone. So the first slide's asking, what commitments will you make towards implementing inclusive behavior supports within your setting? So things that you want to hold yourself to account for. The second one's asking, what has supported your engagement and learning through this community of practice? Are there any barriers that prevented you from engaging? We're very conscious about the time of day, how we've calendared these events. Is there anything we could do to make access easier and to help remove barriers so that more teachers, more educators, more administrators can attend events like this? And is there any other feedback you have for us? So when we do our version 2.0 next year, any things you'd like us to consider as we plan? So I believe actually those are the 4 questions. I'm going to give you a moment to get a sticky tab. Please do try and answer each question if you can. And we're doing this in place of the survey this time. So rather than having to click on a Survey Monkey, please just click on that Jamboard link, and we'll have a 5 minutes so people can get on into that. While you're doing that, I'd love to take a moment to plug some future opportunities that we have. So SIP is running our inclusion conference May 4th and 5th, and this is a virtual conference. It will be running throughout the day. So if you aren't able to get time off, it may be that you can pop in and join us for pieces of them. We have a number of inspirational speakers. We have Dr. Fitzgerald that will be speaking, founder of Building Blocks of Brilliance, Diana Carson, an inclusion advocate, someone who I saw speak a few months ago, was absolutely inspired by. We have some of our UC Davis Redwood Seed Scholars. These are students with intellectual disabilities that are currently enrolled in the UC Davis Scholars Program. And also the mentors that are working with them will also be running a breakout session. We have DJ Diamond, an aspiring actress and model that will be DJing between our sets. And this is basically another opportunity to talk with like-minded educators, get ideas, share best practices, and help implement more inclusive supports within our school sites. So if you're interested in registering for this free event, the link is in the chat. Angelica, I'm seeing you say that the Jamboard won't work, so give me a second and I will check that out. Sounds like it's viewing only. My bad. That's okay. Take 2. If you click the refresh button in the top left-hand side corner, it should work now. Thank you very much for letting me know. There we go. So yeah, that inclusion conference is available to anyone across the state of California. It is free to attend. All the funding is offered by the Department of Education, and it is focusing on inclusion from the ground up to adulthood. So we're talking pre-K all the way through to college education. This is applicable to whatever sector you are working with. We have a number of other professional learning events that we will be running that you can access from our website as they become available. If you're someone that prefers more of the self-paced option, we have partnered with one of our great friends, Katie Novak, who runs phenomenally good courses, and we have free, no-cost access. So if you access these through SIP Inclusion, these courses that usually cost school districts are all available free to you guys to move through at your own pace. On top of the topics that you see listed here, I know there's also a restorative practices course that she is running. And I could see that being a really natural segue for many people who've started to look at this behavior support question. Yeah, lots of great offerings there. So I'm going to throw the floor open to questions. If anyone wants to ask our two resident experts anything, please do stick on and ask around. If not, if you want to log off, I would let you take your time and head on out.